This is the view I'm going to paint today. This is Grafham Water, and it's the first day of the reduction in the lockdown rules. So I've sketched my my scene out here. I'm sitting on my stool just in front of my tripod there, and as you see, I've roughly got the view off to the left, large trees in front of me, and a little bit of a cove as well, where the man-made sort of inlet, this reservoir. It juts in, so I've got a bit of opportunity to show the line and get some interesting shapes going. Just organising myself here. Got a whole bunch of brushes here. I usually start with my wash, my pointed Daleroni wash. Carries a lot of water, but just wet the paper here. Coming right down below the tree line. Because we want to see the sky through our trees. There's not a lot of leaf on, or very little leaf on any of them actually. So they're rather skeletal against the sky. So I want to keep the sky fairly light. Just a little bit of cerulean with a touch of ultramarine there, the brighter blue you see off to the left. Keeping it fairly light. This is a Daleroni, a little plein air kit that I use. Got a fair range of colours there. I'm lifting out a little bit of the sky there. You can do this with a brush, which I do sometimes, but this time I'm just sort of lightly tickling in and not pushing it down too hard, because I don't want to remove all the colour. Just want to suggest a few clouds, wispy clouds, which we had scudding across the sky there. It's a very windy day, hence I'm doing the voiceover. It was just impossible. The noise was just excessive, impossible to listen to, so I've removed the sound and we'll just do the voiceover now. The greens are, I've got leaf green there, but I've added a little bit of blue and ochre so I can get some variety. It's fairly bright out there though, so I've got some warm colour there, some ochre, to try and add some warmth. The sun was shining pretty brightly. In the foreground I tried to give a bit of texture and intensify the colour somewhat. Putting in a few darker tones. There's a bit of a ditch actually running from left to right under this big tree on the left, which you can see sketched out. So I'm trying to suggest something of the ditch here, certainly darker, catching some shade. So dab a few marks into the foreground now. And a hint of the shadows as well. I force them a bit later, but when it's wet I can still drop in this big tree on the left, just casting quite strong shadow. So I thought I'd get those in now while we've got some wet. This is what they call the wet on wet technique. Big tree on the left. But I reinforce these a bit later with a stronger tone. This is just to take advantage of it being very wet. Making up some umber here. Just checking how damp it is in the sky area, where the tree line in the far distance, which I put in shortly. Just where I am now, there was a big bramble, big bush, I think it's bramble. So I'm trying to stipple in something to suggest the shape. Towards the end of the painting, I come in with some harder, thicker paint and suggest some of the branches of the bramble. But this just gets the big bush in, really. A little bit of red there, sort of bracken, and just diffusing from the light. As I said, the light is coming from left to right, so it's casting shadows. Just checking the temperature of the paper, see whether it's damp still. Don't want to put it in when it's too damp and it will bleed and diffuse, which you may want in some situations. But I'm just putting it in a far tree line now. This is sort of half a mile away, quarter or half a mile away. Just the other side of a little cove. I'm trying to suggest that. You see some of it behind the tree on the left. So a bank of trees. Yes, there's quite a big bank of trees behind here. Obviously much closer, but I'm just giving the background tone. You can't see them individually, there's just a whole bank of trees there. It's a few hundred yards off. Still dropping a bit of texture into the foreground, flicking my brush upward motion to try and suggest some grasses. You can do this with this pointed wash. Anything with a sort of feathered edge will do the job, and various brushes are suitable. You can do it with a flat brush. Just flick it up. As you lift it off the paper, you lift your brush away, and the wispy bit should hopefully create some suggestion of the leaves and grass. Just trying to touch in some different tones there into our tree bank. This is my number 8 Tartaroni round. I think I'm making up some blue. I want to put in the water to show the line. Oh no, I'm just using it to darken the tree bank there in the distance. Drop a little bit of blue into the umber there. I want it slightly muted to create a sense of distance. If you have it strong and bright and dark, too dark, it brings it forward into your scene. I want your eye to see it as more distant. So it's a balance, how light, how dark to get it. But it's light against dark, which is the key with a lot of watercolour. So there certainly was dark, but it's all relative to what's before it and what's beyond it. So I'm still toying with some darks. Yes, I think I'm going to put, yes, there's a stone bank here, the little bit of the cove area there, this little inlet they've created with some rocks and boulders, some hard surface. I'm trying to create that. Obviously to reinforce the edge of the reservoir there, stop the bank collapsing. There's some big rocks and boulders there. Yes, varying that far tree bank there. There were dark bits to it closer to me, different types of trees. So I'm trying to mark in those or suggest them. I've got a sort of rigger brush here, which is very flexible. So it introduces sort of randomness, which you need. A few hints of the trees that you have on that far bank. Just trying to reinforce our line so our eye can be taken out into the far distance. Oh yes, I'm trying to put in the water now, water's edge in the distance. Trying to reflect the colour from the sky. What I'm doing now is getting a damp brush. I want to try and lift out, because the water came in here. There's a bit of it in there. I've got some green there, but which I spread out. I don't really want to do it, so I'm lifting out now with a damp brush. Just dab it in, try and lift, and then wash it out again. And you see it's getting a little bit lighter, so I can then drop in a blue or preserve some of my white, because you use the white of the paper in watercolour where possible to give your lights. I've gone to a flat brush now. This has got a little bit more stiffness to it, and that's often a little better for, we need to apply a bit of pressure there. And you can see I'm wiping in there, try and lift, drag it across, and then you wash it, squeeze out the water with the edge there. It gives us something a little bit lighter. Yes, putting the blue in now, obviously, well I can. This is a very popular park. Grafham Water, the wind whipping across there. Very popular for sailing. Good blow, there were a few yachts out there. Using the edge of the flat brush now to try and create some shapes of these trees that are in this far bank. There were a couple of trees out here. I'm trying to preserve the silhouette, so you can do this with just, you see the edge of that flat brush is broken a little bit, so that gives me a sort of slightly feathered effect. You can use the edge. Yes, I'm just darkening up the base of the tree line there. The base of this tree, a hedge. It's always darker and towards the bottom, because the sun is not getting down there. You notice I'm moving all across my picture as I see an opportunity to use that colour or make an amendment. You can move anywhere, there's no particular order. I work from all over as my eye is drawn to elements that need adjustment. Yes, my bramble bush, I'm trying to put some tone there again, dark towards the bottom where the sun is not getting there. Starting now to put in my big tree. This is a big feature of this scene. I'm using a variety of tones there. Generally speaking, those shapes and structures close to you have darker and more colour, or more vivid, more saturation. So you should try and do that. Just putting the main boughs here. I'm following fairly accurately as they were, avoiding just generically throwing in a branch. This was very much the shape. And I did sketch in, I probably can't see the marks now, but these are the broad outline of the limbs. So I'll darken up on that as we go. The different colours, umbers and greens, and starting to map out this other tree on my right. Just loosely the basic shape, but come in with thicker paint later, and smaller brushes, of course, later. Using my number 8 round brush now to tighten up on some of these boughs. It's quite a edge, a little point to this brush. Very, very useful brush. Can do fine work with it, but also put some more broad strokes in. Trying to get some of the finer branches in now. Just using the point of that number 8. Enforcing a little bit of the grass here. Trying to introduce some sort of variety and interest. If you have an area of real flat one tone, it can be a little boring. Just a little touch there, and some of these, some finer branches here now. Fairly muted, we can barely see them, but I'll strengthen that later. Darker colours. Different tones there. And a little bit of umber there. A little bit of different greens. Add some interest. Brighten up the colour there. Of course, watercolour dries so much lighter. Maybe 50%, so you have to make sure you've got enough colour there. Because when you get home you realise, it's a little paler than I wanted. It's takes fine judgment. Bit of green going in here to some of these limbs of this green sheen to parts of them. I'm trying to darken up a little bit as well. As I said, it is projecting into our sky scene, so it does look darker against the sky. It's a bright sky. I've got to do that. Just still trying to get in some of the finer limbs. There was a mass of them actually. There's a pigeon on my roof on my chimney. I'm afraid you're having to put up with him, I suspect. Trying to emphasize this ditch again. It's in front of me. Darken up the tones and these limbs. That pigeon's definitely got a lot to say. I'm using a rigger now, much finer brush to put in some of these finer branches. Trying to vary the tones and the shapes to represent. This brush is called a rigger, of course, because it was used by the Victorian and earlier artists to paint in the rigging of ships. So you needed a very fine brush to do that, so hence we call them rigger. Trying to darken up a bit too on some of the limbs now, trying to put more definition and detail in. You can go on doing a great deal of detail actually. You could head towards the realism if you really were to study the trunk of a tree and put every little mark in. But this is more an impressionistic style, just to recall the impression and the atmosphere of your plein air expedition out there in the day, this lovely day. I'm using the finer brush now to put in some fine marks on that bramble bush, try and suggest some of the lines and the branches of the bramble. So in the foreground you can try to put in a little bit more detail to help it read. Taking my pointed wash brush now. I think I'm about to reinforce the shadows. So I've taken some crimson alizarin there and a little bit of purple there, a bit of crimson there, an ultramarine, a bit too red there, so I drop a bit of blue in. It's a good shadow colour really. And then this tree on the left is casting quite a marked shadow across this quite strong light really. So I did put them in earlier when we first did a wash, but now it's dry, I can go over and enforce them a little bit if I wish. This tree is casting some as well. Putting the shadows in, of course, will help show where the light is coming from. The light is coming from the left. So we want to get this light and dark in our watercolor, really emphasizing now this tree in the foreground certainly needs to be darker. Strangely enough, when you put in the darks, your lights look lighter. Very strange phenomenon. I suppose it's by comparison. Just trying to emphasize with the tip of this round pointed wash brush a little bit more colour on these main limbs to help it read more realistically. Trying to put a bit more detail into the foreground. There's lots of twigs and sticks and leaf just blowing away around here on my foreground. So I'm trying to draw in a few of the sticks. They're right on my feet here, so I have no excuse. They were right in front of me there. Just add some detail. Just enough to suggest, of course. Don't put everything in. Just enough to set the mood and the scene. Try to suggest a few leaves. There was a lot, some dried up leaves. Still. Trying to brighten the colour up a bit. All the grass ahead of me there, just by the water. A little bit of warmer colour, bit of ochre, I think, there. Emphasize some warmth and sunshine. A few marks now in the water, horizontal, just to try and help us read it a little bit as water. Just behind, so you get a glimpse of it. Just brightening up a bit in the colour in the meadow there and the grasses. My flat brush, a little bit more vivid colour. This was looking a bit pale, so emphasize, brighten it up a little bit. Add some colour there. Just behind our trees there. You can see through the grass, the other side there. Using the rigger again to try and give a little bit more emphasis to some of these limbs, trying to darken up, put a bit of texture into the main trunk of this tree here. Some more little marks that you have on the bark, little cracks and crevices. Try and introduce a little bit of texture into them. A little bit of dark there in that tree line, just to emphasize the shadow and the canopy of that tree, casting a little bit. Again, tightening up on these limbs. this at the base of this tree. You get these little shoots going, a little bit of grass here. I'm trying to put some texture in. With some tufts of grass. Here I'm just stippling in a little bit of white, a bit of Chinese white, to pick up those stones on that embankment. Also a few streaks of white in the water there. So it was blowing quite strongly there, so there was little white, little wavelets showing. Putting a little bit of darker blue there just to give some more emphasis to the water. Horizontal strokes there, reflecting the sky colour, of course. It's the same, just reflection of the sky, but I think it needed a bit of emphasis there. Well, here we have the finished article.